When it comes to technology, and specifically smartphones, Samsung is one of the most well-known brands on the planet. The company is currently worth an almost unbelievable $520.5 billion. And there are approximately 1 billion Samsung users around the world. And while you've likely heard of Samsung before, or even have a Samsung device at home, you probably don't know that this incredibly successful company was actually started by a young Korean boy who once only sold noodles in his neighborhood. Lee Byung-Chull was born on February 12, 1910 in South Korea. His parents, Lee Chan-woo and Kwon Jae-lim, had 4 children and lived a comfortable life as they owned land in Uryong County and therefore were considered wealthy. Although his country was being occupied by Japan when Lee was a young boy, his family was left alone due to their wealth and social status. So Lee was able to complete his schooling at Jongdong High School in Seoul and then attended Waseda University in Tokyo, Japan. However, Lee did not complete his degree. He returned home to South Korea in order to help look after the family land. Shortly after returning to his homeland, Lee decided that he would start his own business, but it wasn't a technology-based business. In fact, his first business venture was to open a grocery store in the local city, and he called it Samsung Trading Company. Samsung translates to 3 stars, and he chose this name because it represented a constellation in Korean folklore that tells the story of a kind-hearted dragon fighting against an evil dragon. The Samsung Trading Company made its money by making and trading noodles, as well as other food products. While they sold some of their products in the city of Daegu, most of the company's profits came from exporting the goods to China. By 1947, World War II was in full swing. The affordable and necessary products that the Samsung Trading Company was making were essential in both Korea and China, and the company was doing exceedingly well. Lee was able to move the headquarters to Seoul that year, but unfortunately, he was not able to stay as the Korean War broke out, and Lee needed to flee the capital and head south to Busan. Luckily, his relocation ended up helping create his immense success as he was able to open 2 new factories in the south. Still making food of all varieties, Lee and his partner, Cho Hong-jae, started arguing about which goods they should and shouldn't produce. So in 1954, the company dissolved into 3 different branches: the Hyosung Group, the Samsung Group, and Hankook Tire. While Samsung was certainly doing well for itself, it also helped that because the business was technically family-run, it received assistance from the government to ensure that Korean businesses stayed profitable. With these profits, Samsung purchased 3 of the country's largest banking institutions, an insurance provider, a cement manufacturer, and a fertilizer manufacturer. And most people agree that these purchases in the 1950s led Samsung to become one of the most successful companies in the world. The Samsung Group changed its focus to start helping Korea become a part of the worldwide industrial revolution, and in 1969, it opened its first electronics factory. But Samsung didn't start small. As soon as Lee decided to branch out into the electronics sector, he immediately opened 4 more companies under the Samsung umbrella: Samsung Corning, Samsung Semiconductor and Telecommunications, Samsung Electromechanics, and Samsung Electronic Devices. Because there were no smartphones or laptops at the time, Samsung started producing the electronics that were popular in the 1970s: microwaves, refrigerators, electric calculators, air conditioners, and televisions. Samsung produced an incredible 5 million televisions by 1978, and with its amazing profits, Samsung continued to expand, making its own chips for exporting and even opening a company in the USA. By the end of the decade, Lee Byung-Chull was one of the richest Koreans in the world, and even towards the top of the list of richest people on Earth. He sat on the board of the leaders of industry in Korea, which allowed him to have a significant influence on the development of technologies throughout the country. At the start of the 1980s, Samsung finally made its way to the telecommunications division of the technology industry. It started by producing telephone switchboards and soon after began making telephone and fax systems that were being purchased both in Korea and around the world. Sadly, Lee Byung-Chull would never see the company that he created with his own 2 hands start making mobile phones. The successful businessman died on November 18, 1987, just 1 year before Samsung broke into the mobile phone game. Thankfully, he was 77 years old when he passed, and he spent decades training his son, Lee Hyung-ki, to take over the family empire. Lee Hyung-ki was ready for the job as Samsung's leader, But sadly, his first few years as president did not lead to the profits the company had expected. They knew that mobile phones were the future and expected big sales right away, but people weren't buying Samsung phones because Motorola was already a well-known telecommunications brand. In fact, Motorola controlled 60% of the Korean mobile phone market, and Samsung had a measly 10%. The problem was that Samsung's phones were not considered as technologically advanced or as reliable as Motorola's. Although the board members of Samsung Telecommunications considered dropping the mobile phones and focusing on other products, luckily, Lee Kun-hee didn't let that happen. He had a different plan in mind. Instead of focusing on the unsuccessful phones they were currently producing, Lee Kun-hee decided that the Samsung Telecommunications factory would spend their money and energy on modern and up-and-coming technology. This decision changed everything for Samsung. By investing in new technologies, Samsung surpassed Sony and became one of the top 20 technology companies in the world. Samsung's understanding of the new tech allowed it to make products that consumers actually wanted to use, and it quickly became a fan favorite. By the time the new millennium arrived, Samsung was back on top. But Lee Kun-hee didn't stop there. He continued to push the envelope with available technologies and in 2010 released the company's first smartphone. Although it wasn't the first smartphone available, Apple had released the first iPhone 3 years before. The general consensus was that the Galaxy S was one of the best Android smartphones on the planet. At the same time that Samsung released its first of many smartphones, Lee Kun-hee, the son of the noodle company creator, became the richest man in South Korea. His incredible success in the industry could have led Lee Kun-hee to take a step back and enjoy his riches. But instead, he continued to improve his company's products and made several variations of the smartphone, each one better than the last. In addition to smartphones, Samsung started making laptops, tablets, and continued making televisions, but now with all the latest technological advancements. Although the company and the family have become almost ridiculously wealthy due to Samsung's success, it wasn't all smooth sailing. Before Lee Kun-hee died on October 25, 2020, he was convicted twice for corruption and tax evasion charges. However, he was pardoned in both instances. But his financial issues did nothing to deter his success in both wealth and power. In fact, in 2014, he was named the world's 35th most powerful person and the most powerful Korean by Forbes. In 2020, when Kun-hee passed away, it was his son, Lee Jae-jong, who took the reins as the president of Samsung. Although he was already incredibly wealthy and had been trained by his father in preparation for the takeover, Lee Jae-jong faced more issues than his father or grandfather ever did. Lee Jae-jong was also arrested for alleged corrupt practices and was convicted in 2017. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison, but he served less than a year of that sentence before being released in 2018. However, only 2 years after being released from jail in 2020, he violated capital market laws for unfair trading, stock manipulation, and breach of trust in connection. Though due to his power and connections, he once again served less than a year of his sentence and was released in 2021. In order for Lee Jae-jong to be released, the president of South Korea required changes within the organization of the Samsung company. Essentially, instead of passing the reins after his death, whenever that might be, to his direct descendants, Samsung will no longer be exclusively a family-run empire. The idea behind this new policy is that the immense wealth of the Lee family will be more evenly distributed among Koreans. In addition to these personal struggles within the family, Samsung also faced some of the worst publicity problems of all time. Samsung users noticed that all of the major apps were running slower on Samsung devices than any other smartphones. And after some research was conducted, it turned out that the apps ran a ridiculous 56% slower on Samsung phones than any other. And to make matters worse, somehow Samsung was able to dupe the system that tracked the speed of the smartphones. This means customers thought they were purchasing and using some of the fastest smartphones when they were actually the slowest. Although Samsung had issued an official apology for not only disappointing their customers but, more importantly, for lying about it, the company's general popularity has seriously faltered. Samsung has attempted to improve its technology for years, including adding Bixby, an AI assistant that is similar to Apple's popular Siri option. And just as his father did, Lee Jae-jong is focusing on the future and creating smartphones and devices that anticipate the needs of the consumer. It's been said that Samsung recently invested over $22 billion in new technologies to improve the user experience. Today, the company is heavily concentrating on providing advanced AI technology on all of its devices. The company is using its billions of dollars in revenue to reinvest in its products so that it can get back into the good graces of the masses. And it seems to be working, with scientists all around the world working day and night, as well as new acquisitions and huge investments. Samsung plans to go back to its roots and provide the world with cutting-edge technology that will change the world of telecommunications yet again. To think that this company, now worth over $500 billion, was created by a Korean college dropout who started a noodle company during World War II is almost unbelievable. But that is exactly what happened. Hungry for another fascinating business story? Click on the following video to hear the crazy story about the son of an engineer who invented the world's largest car manufacturer.